Olivia Winster, keeping you informed, engaged, and connected. Cleveland, are you ready for a change? Are you ready to see something different? Something different in your community? Make it happen. Be the change, Cleveland. It all starts with you. Shirley Chisholm said it best herself when she said, progress does not happen when you're in the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress when you implement ideas. Last week we were in the studio with Carrie Howard, who is running for Judge of Common Pleas. We talked about the importance of voting and voting as a right and a responsibility. Today, we will be discussing voting power and women's influence in voting and in government with minority health advocate and candidate running for Ohio State Senate, Yavanka Hall. Yavanka, welcome to the studio.
Hi, how are you? I'm running for state representative.
State representative. My apologies.
That's okay.
So, Yavanka, before we get right into the topic, apparently this is not your first time in the KAZ studio. Is that correct?
This is not my first time.
Okay.
Here.
Well, tell me, when was the last time you visited us?
I was here with Lady Gilmore. Maybe last year, maybe last summer.
Okay. Well, we're glad to have you back. Let's talk about where did you go to school, Miss Yavanka?
So we want to talk about formative years. I graduated through, matriculated through Cleveland Municipal School District, and then Notre Dame College, and then Texas Southern University. I have a master's in public administration with a focus on public policy.
I graduated from Notre Dame College as well.
Okay.
What did you get your degree in?
Political science and history.
Okay, so that pairs well with
your. Yeah, and then the public policy piece from Texas Southern with the master's in public administration, with a focus on public policy. So I am well armed to do the work that I want to do.
That is wonderful. So why did you select those majors?
You know what? I have actually been involved. I grew up in a neighborhood that was very involved in government. And so one of the things about my neighbors is my neighbors would actively petition to City Hall to get change in our community. And so if things weren't going right, they didn't have a problem protesting. So I grew up with a bunch of neighbors who were older, who knew the power of their vote, and they were willing to use their feet and their voices to change their community. And so I grew up with activists. And so when you grow up with activists, that's what you become.
This was around you in your neighborhood. What about in the home? What did your parents do?
So my grandparents were right there with that group. I grew up on Wayne Drive, which is on the southeast side of Cleveland. I actually came there after my mom was murdered. So my mom was murdered in 1974, and we went to live with my grandparents. And so my grandparents moved us from 116th between Kinsman and Union to the Lee Harbor community for safety. So they moved us there so we could be in a safe neighborhood with good schools. And so what I do is I look at it now. We moved in 1975. And so I look at my community now and see what has been that evolution in all of those years since we've been there, which has been 45 years that I've lived in that community. And I've seen a dramatic change. We've seen high crime. We've seen the devaluing of education in the community. All of our schools, every single school except for the new schools that are built in that community have all tested positive for lead. And so for me, this is about how do we make sure that the people's voices are heard on all of the issues that we're talking about. And so for me, I have always worked to educate, advocate for, and empower the community. And so I want to continue that by taking my talents to the State House in order to fight for the people who live in my neighborhood.
Wonderful. So it sounds like you're very connected to the city of Cleveland, and you are, obviously, you're a Cleveland native, born and raised.
Born and raised.
What is the work that you're doing now?
Wow. So I've been doing advocacy work for about 25 years. I started off doing work in HIV research. And the research involved the education of African American women around HIV/AIDS, and so that was some 25 years ago. So that was the first time we actually started talking about HIV and AIDS in the African American community. That work has grown into, I was the first African American woman or woman director to run a harm reduction program in the state of Ohio, which is a syringe exchange program, which we talk about the opiate epidemic. Well, I was at the front end of that my son is almost 21 years old, over 20 years ago. I headed the pieces that were here in Cleveland, and so a lot of people don't know that. I also hosted a radio show in 2000 that was called Healthy 2000 to focus on health issues impacting the community. I worked with the NAACP. I filed one of the first complaints about the voting rights and the civil rights of voters in, I think it was 2004, in the 2004 election, maybe in the 2003 election. My son was still young then. Because people were going to their polling places and finding out their polling places didn't exist anymore. You know, that it was just an empty building, or going to their polling places and realizing that their machines didn't work. And so that work went on to the Heart Association. So I went into the Heart Association to run the Northeast Ohio Cultural Health Initiatives piece. I created a number of programs. I created a number of award-winning programs that actually some still continue to this day. And one of them was 300 Sisters. It was Sisters in Red. And so in Youngstown, they still have that program, and it's called 300 Sisters in Red. They still have it across the country. And the reason I created it is because the first wave of Go Red for Women did not look like me. Even though African American women were disproportionately impacted by cardiovascular disease, Go Red for Women was still a program that still focused on majority white women. And so we were not talking about African American women and their risks around cardiovascular disease, including stroke. You know, women have more strokes than men. Men have more strokes than women, but women are more likely to die as a direct result of their strokes. And that's because we are the nurturers. So we're able to nurse them back to health, but nobody's there for us. And so after the Heart Association, the state came and asked me if I would actually open up their office of minority health. So they had this new idea. And so I came in to run their local office on minority health. And so when I came in to run their office of minority health, they put it in the city health department. And so that's where I met you. So they put that office in the city health department, and I actually ran that office and received some national recognition for my work in that office. Doing work with the Asian community, and in 2012 I was devoted the Distinguished Hispanic Ohioan for my work with the Hispanic community. So my work goes across the board on communities.
I had no idea you had done so much in the Cleveland community. Why minority health specifically? You went over some reasons that Black women in particular, we're falling through the cracks as far as health, and our health concerns aren't being addressed. Why minority health for you?
Well, I think it's not only our health concerns aren't being addressed, but our equity concerns aren't being addressed. So we know that white men make $1 to white women's 80 cents, but Black women make 61 cents to the 80 cents to the dollar. And so we make less money. And so that means when it comes time for us to retire, we have less in our chest for us to retire with. And then a lot of times what has been happening with African American women is in midlife, all of a sudden they lose their jobs. And so they're using their income that they had saved. They're using their savings in order for them to survive. And so when it comes time for them to retire, they don't have that nest egg. And so we see a lot of people who retire impoverished. And so when we talk about poverty, we have to talk about social determinants of health. We have to talk about education, employment, housing, and health, and how it plays into the well-being of not only African American women, but the communities that they're seeking to support. Because African American women raise African American men.
Absolutely. And why is it termed as minority health? Why not just health?
Well, you know what? So the word minority was a way for them to talk about people that were other folks other than white. And so we know that the minority population, the way it is now, is actually the majority population. But they still use the word minority. And so for my coalition is called the Black Health Coalition, because what we focus on is a minority. We focus on African Americans and African Americans only. And the reason that I focus on African Americans only and not other populations is because all of those other coalitions, all of those other groups, the Native American group, the Asian Pacific Islander group, the Latino group, all of them have their own coalitions. And so I'm not creating anything because of racial issues. I'm creating it because there was nothing that was created for me. So I had to create a niche that only looked at the disparities that existed in my community. Because when you have a community that is, we have a cradle to prison pipeline that is out of control. We have our children who are uneducated because we have taken trades out of schools. So now they're leaving out of these systems with no skills. We have to figure out a way and have legislators legislate a way in order for us to have those things to create parity in our systems, to make sure that we're looking at education, employment, housing, and health.
Let's go into your campaign. You're running for, again,
State representative for District 12.
state representative for District 12. What is that? Who do you serve? What is your role?
Well, the role actually is to create legislation that actually uses the voice of the people, takes the voice of the people back to Columbus and uses that voice in order to create legislation that changes the lives and circumstances of people. They are actually in charge of also setting the budget and how money is brought down, and what kind of funding is brought down into our local levels. But what we've been seeing is we see legislators that are in Columbus, but we never see our voice with them. And so a lot of the things that we may see that are going on there, because we've had a Republican-controlled House and Senate since 1995. But that doesn't mean that the Democrats don't have power. It's sometimes you have to create bipartisan measures in order for you to get legislation that you need passed for your community. So that means work across the aisle. So that means that it may be a Republican member that also wants some things in their community that mirror some of the things that you need in your community. So you don't look at it and say, I'm only working on Democratic issues, because these are people issues. So you look at the issues that are impacting the community, because a lot of people who live in Appalachia are Republican. And so that means the Appalachian community has a lot of the concerns that the African American community have, or that poor communities have. And so you reach across the aisle and you work with those representatives in order for you to make sure that you're legislating for policy that's going to be passed and going to impact the lives of people that are here in the Cleveland area.
Have you done much traveling during your campaign? Are you going to Columbus? What kind of footwork are you doing right now?
Well, before this campaign, as part of the Northeast Ohio, as a director of the Northeast Ohio Black Health Coalition, I'm in Columbus quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I'll be I'm the keynote speaker for the Single Payer Action Networks conference in Columbus, which is on April the 28th. I'll be there talking about racism in healthcare. So I'm there talking about health disparities. I talk about effectively engaging the African American community. As a matter of fact, I don't only talk about the things that are impacting us in Ohio. I go across the country and speak. I'm actually scheduled to speak in Durham, North Carolina on April the 23rd through the 26th. I'll be there talking about effectively engaging the African American community. So for me, it's how do we make sure that the people's voices are heard on all of the issues that we're talking about? And I'm not just talking about the African American community, because as a legislator, I'm legislating for everybody in the community. But in my district, I have people who are very, very wealthy. So when we're talking about Orange, Pepper Pike, Mayfield Heights, very wealthy. But then we have people who live on the southeast side of Cleveland who make less than $10,000 a year. So how do we create parity for those communities that don't have enough? And so one of those ways that you can help shape parity is we have a lot of people who live in those suburbs who are entrepreneurs. Okay? We have a lot of people who are in the cities who don't have jobs. So can we pair these entrepreneurs with people who need jobs and actually create legislation that will actually give them tax incentives for hiring people in the community? And if we can, and I know we can, why isn't it being done?
What is the experience required for state representative?
There is no experience required for being a state
So
representative.
I could just, how do you even begin that process? Just say, hey, I'm running for state representative.
And that's what we get. And so that's what has happened over these years, is that a lot of times we get people who are not experienced around the issues that impact the community. And they run because they have their friends' backings. They were such and such daughters. They were such and such kids.
How do you get the experience with the community?
So you get the experience from the community by being with the community, advocating for the community, working on behalf of the community. I worked on behalf of the community for years. Like, if nobody else knows the name Yvanka Hall, if they don't know me, they may know my name. So they may not know what I look like. But as soon as I say I'm Ivanka Hall, they're like, I've heard of you.
You've been all through the Cleveland
Yeah,
community.
I've heard of you before. And so I'm hoping that, people will not look at my name, but they'll look at my work and say, because she is willing to step out on behalf of the community, we are willing to put our vote in for her, because not only is she trusted, she's experienced, and she's qualified to be. So I'm not coming here with a blank slate.
What are the challenges that the state representative, well, whoever that is, whoever's selected, what are the challenges that they'll face this year during this term?
I think, some of the challenges we talked about is that we do have a Republican controlled House and Senate. I think that that's one of the challenges. That's a big challenge. But once you know who your partners are, who the people that you can work with to get things done, then that becomes less of a challenge. Because what people are there to do is advocate on behalf of the citizens in their community. Mm-hmm. So I don't care what your personal preference is. Who you're here to work for is the community. So once you get here, it's not about you. It's about what are you doing for the community. So for me, I think that that's one of the challenges. The other thing is the challenge that I talked about for the representative work. Because of gerrymandering, my district has gone from the district that had poor and middle class to it has poor, middle class, and upper and beyond upper middle class. So it has people, the very wealthy and the very extremely poor. And so because of that, that's a challenge too, because you want to make sure that as a representative, you're representing the best interests of everybody across the board.
Now, is this your first time running?
This is not my first time running. Oh. I actually ran in 2001, and I actually was not into the running. Like, my grandfather had recently passed, and I had promised him that I was going to run for this seat. And I really wasn't into it. I wasn't engaged. I wasn't involved. I wasn't anything.
Why now?
I ended up being a write-in candidate.
Why now?
Well, you know what? I'm 50 years old, so I turned 50 in November. And I think you get to a point in your life where I was on Facebook complaining. I was complaining about the lack of leadership. I was complaining about, how come we can't get people to do what I do? Like, I'm willing to throw it all on the line for my community. How come other folks aren't willing to throw it all on the line for the community? Because if you're an advocate, a true advocate, you're willing to advocate no matter what. And so for me, I'm willing to advocate no matter what. So even without an income, I was willing to advocate. And so for me, the now was, I will never get this time in my life again. And so this is my time for me to use what I have in order for me to change the conditions of my community.
What has your experience been like so far, and what are some of the challenges you faced, and how have you overcome these challenges?
So lifelong challenges, one of the things that we can talk about, if we talk about early challenges, it was, my mom died when she was young. So that was a challenge. And so I think that a lot of us come into our work because of tragedy. Circumstances bring us into the lifestyles that we choose and the things that we choose. And so we figure out a way to get through those. And so for me, it's those challenges came, but those challenges made me stronger and made me a stronger and more informed candidate. So I'm a candidate that understands the things that are going on in the community, understands the challenges of being a single mom, understands the challenges of being poor, understands the challenges of when people are going through issues around banking and housing and finance and all of those other things, from being a mother and now a grandmother. And so looking at those things and saying, you know what, let me use what I have in order for me to help people to have a better outcome.
We're going to dig further into the topic now. Let's talk about African American women in government. Okay, what is our role? How would you, if you could spell it out for us or tell us exactly, what is our role in government?
Well, one of the things that I can tell you is that African American women are the highest voting bloc in the United States. That nobody votes higher than African American women. And so what has happened over these years is that our vote has been dismissed. Wow. And it's been dismissed because even though we were the highest voting bloc, we were passive in our engagement. So we gave our votes away.
What do you mean by that?
So the passiveness is, I don't want to rock the boat, so I'm going to vote for this person, but I'm not going to push them on the issues that matter most to me. And so what we need to do is we need to stop being passive aggressive and actually push the people that we're electing into office
So
on
we
the
need-
issues that matter most to our community.
We need to be in the meetings where they're at. We need to be
Oh, yeah.
writing and
You need to be in
reaching
their
out to
face.
them.
You need to be calling them. You know, you need to be sending them letters. You need to be doing writing campaigns. You need to get your church people involved. I mean, we need to go back to the original grassroots organizing. And grassroots organizing was if you had to go knock door to door. There was no such thing as cell phone. There was no internet. You know, we went door to door and coalesced the community on our issues.
What are the challenges African American women face? Why are we taking on this position? Why are we putting ourselves in this position where we don't want to rock the vote? What challenge is in front of us that's preventing us or stopping us from reaching out to our leadership?
Well, I think it's a couple things that are twofolds to this. So one of them is we talked about African American women being engaged, but African American men are also not elected into office. Okay, so we're talking about this is the year of the woman, particularly African American women, but we don't have a lot of African American males that are involved in leadership roles in office either. And so we need African American women because African American women have traditionally been able to work across the board in order for them to get things resolved and to get them solved for their community. And so I think that's why it's important for African American women to be involved.
When we run, how much of our identity impacts our campaign? What do people expect of us? What do they want us to advocate for versus what we actually advocate for when we're running? What is the expectation, and how do people mix our identity with our campaign? Could you talk about that?
Well, I think that African American women have always been associated with being these super women. You know, like we can do everything. We can fly, bake. We can, do it all. But I think
Miss
that
Independent.
yeah, and that we are Wonder Women. And that we are magic, because I remember Jesse Williams in one of his speeches a few years ago. He said, African American women have been defined as everything, including magical. And so for us, we have to understand that what our limitations are as lawmakers, but we also have to understand what our strengths are, because we do have the power. We do hold the power in our hands to help change our communities. And I think that if we have more women, we have more empathy. We have more women who are willing to work and fight because they know what it's like to work and fight for their communities. And I think that that's what changes the dynamics, is because when you have women who are sitting at the table, the women who are sitting at the table understand why they came to the table. So I'm not coming to a meeting to meet. Like I'm not coming to this position because I want to sit in the room just to let you know that I was in the room. I'm coming into the room because I want you to know that I'm in the room.
Okay, Miss Hall. Who inspires you?
Wow. So Fannie Lou Hamer has been my inspiration for a long, long time. She was an advocate. She was an entrepreneur. She made 25 cents a day, and she donated money to people who were campaigning. She donated money to the civil rights workers off of 25 cents a day. We have people who make $2,500 or $25,000 a day and won't donate anything to anybody. And so for me, I looked at her work and said, because people always talk about her saying, I'm tired of being sick and tired, but they didn't understand what her struggle was. They didn't understand what had happened to her. They didn't understand that she was beaten almost to death, that she was arrested, and that the jailers actually had African American men beat her into an inch of her life, and that she died young. She was 57 years old when she passed away. And so just looking at her body of work and the fact that when she actually spoke before the Democratic National Convention, that the President of the United States interrupted her and stopped her from speaking by blacking out that show. Yeah, so she was a bad woman.
Wow.
And she doesn't get enough credit for the work that she did.
Wow. Well, thank you for highlighting her and the work that she's done. And let's talk about voting now. Could you stress to our audience why is it so important to vote? And what the women's vote especially, we make up such a large percentage of our population. You already explained that we do have voting power. Can you talk about why is it so important to vote and what is voting power?
So, your vote is your voice. And if you do not vote, you do not have a voice. And your voting power allows you to be able to put in legislators that are able to work on your behalf. And so it's important for women to use that power that they have in order for them to change the conditions of their community. So it's not just enough for us to vote, because voting is important. But you have to vote in the right people. You have to vote for people who are engaged and involved and have your best interests at heart.
And voting for the right people, that takes what?
That takes some
Research?
knowledge base. It takes for you to do some research. It takes for you to know your candidates and to make sure that you understand what they're talking about. And don't just vote for somebody because they were endorsed by the party. Because one of the things about party endorsements is party endorsements start at the top. So once the top of the ticket says that they endorse you, everybody else has to fall in line because they want to be endorsed.
Why?
So they're not falling in line because they're falling in line because they have to. So don't look for the person that says I'm an endorsed candidate. Look for the best candidate.
Why do people doubt their voting power?
Because they don't see a change. They don't see a change.
How important is it to vote beyond presidential election? Why do some people just stop there?
Because they think that the president controls everything else. But one of the things that we should know is that all politics is local.
Well, Miss Ivanka, could you tell the people out there, how can they reach out to you?
So they can reach out to me by calling me at 216-802-8101, or they can also contact my campaign. They can email us at Hall Reps, so Hall, Hall, Reps, Ohio OH, District 12 at gmail.com.
You shared so much with us already. Do you have a final message you'd like to send to Cleveland, specifically to the people out there in Cleveland? What would you like to say to them?
Sure. What I would tell them is to vote for the candidate they know that is willing to have their best interests in heart. Vote for the people's candidate. I am the people's progressive. And make sure that when you vote on May 8th, that you vote for Ivanka Hall for District 12, for State Representative for District 12, and that we're all in for Hall to win.
Well, there you have it, Cleveland. Miss Ivanka Hall, she is here with a purpose. Thank you for tuning in to the Good Day with Olivia show. I'm Olivia Winstead, and I am signing off. I'll see you next week.